Good morning, everyone. How are you folks doing today? Is it great? Okay. First of all, I'm really excited to be in Pristina. This is my second trip, getting to know a lot about this wonderful country. And it's with great pleasure and it's an honor for me to be here on stage, talking to you about a topic that I'm passionately believe in, as well as something that I think is going to be an exciting future for this country and industry of technology here. Okay. All right, so I wanted to start with a typical morning. So if your morning is anything like mine, you wake up in the morning, there's an alarm clock, and that's how you wake up. And now you have digital alarm clocks, your phone rings for you, there's different ways you get it. And then if you're anything like me, within a minute, you reach for your phone. You want to check the social media and you want to try and figure out what's happening around the world. Then you move on, you're ready to grab that cup of coffee, and then you get into your car or a vehicle, and then you end up in a school, you end up in an office, or wherever you work. The interesting thing about this morning, by the way, how many of you can relate to at least one or two of these things that I put up there? Wonderful. That basically means we live with innovation around us. We don't see it, we take it for granted, but every one of this is an invention and an innovation that has brought quality of life into our existence. So I wanted to make the distinction. It all starts with definitions, and as engineers and software folks, we want to make sure we understand the definition of what we're talking about. So the first thing is this word called invention. So where you come up with an idea, you discover it, sometimes serendipitously, sometimes you focus on things, and you invent something. And that could be a product. For instance, you get a light bulb, right? It was invented a long time back. But the light bulb is just a product. Without the supporting electrical grid and the technology associated with it, lighting is not affordable to the mass market. And that's where innovation comes in. Innovation takes that invention and then gets it to the whole community and world. And that can be done in terms of process, it can be a product, it can be putting things together. But what it does, it creates idea. It takes an idea and it converts it into value that then can be used by a lot of people. There's another side to innovation, and that it causes disruption. Almost always when something new comes in, is it okay? I'm sure that's some innovation somewhere happening that's causing that. So it also causes disruption. So every time something new comes, something gets destroyed. It's called constructive destruction, but that's important for innovation to thrive and keep going on. I'm sure a lot of you listen to Spotify, but in previous times, they used to have actually devices where you would play an LP, a vinyl record, and then iPhone came and then got disrupted by Spotify. So the disruption continuously happens. And that's what you sign up for when you go take the bold journey down and you start innovating. I put this 10, what is called top 10 list. Everybody has a top 10 list and it changes. But the key theme here is every one of this has had global impact over the years. And the reason I chose these versus talking about Twitter is everybody knows about Twitter and all the social media stuff. But these innovations helped and set the stage for where we are today. And a lot of people talked about being here 11 years ago, and now you're here, and then you continue this journey. But when you look back, every one of these created such disruption and impact that we wouldn't be here today without these. You take the printing press, it changed the way everybody reads, and today we have Kindle. You take electric light, we take it for granted. It converted night into day and improved productivity around the world, and it basically created social and economic value. So I called out the one thing that we can all relate to, which is the computer. And what it does for us, it's very hard to describe. Almost everything is driven by computers. Now, if you look at a car, it has motherboards in it, right? So essentially what it does is it has changed the way we think about things. It has changed the way we live our lives, and it's changed the way everything happens. And that's why I call it, as they say, the rest is history. Because the last 30, 40 years, we have seen so many advances and innovation. The rate at which innovation happens has been phenomenally faster than what we have seen. But without these things in place, it would be hard to innovate as much. So my message to some of the current innovators is keep persisting, because what you do today is going to make it easier for future innovators as they try to bring more ideas to market. So how does this happen? In 1991, there was a major storm off the coast of Boston. They called it the perfect storm. And the reason they called it the perfect storm is because there were a few weather patterns that needed to come together to create the storm. And so, if you're a meteorologist, you could go your entire lifetime and not see these things come together. But as entrepreneurs and innovators, we are more fortunate. There are a lot of these enabling things that are there together. And what does it take to create? And why is innovation important? Because it creates high impact, as we just talked about. You need a team, a startup team, that has a brilliant vision. They see things that nobody else sees way before it happens. So you need a core set of people who think of an idea. They need to make sure that they have a really bold vision. Need to make sure that all the enablers are in place, because if the enablers are not there, for instance, if somebody talked about setting things up in the cloud 40 years ago, it wouldn't have been possible, because the connectivity was not there, the software was not there, the infrastructure to do these things were not there. So all those enablers need to be in place. And last but not the least, you need a big enough market, because if you come up with an idea and there's not enough people that can use it, then the innovation kind of settles down into a smaller output. So what does that mean for us? There has to be a human need. And this has been shown throughout history that when there is a pressing human need, innovation really, really flourishes. Let's take the telephone as an example. People want to communicate. That's why the telephone lasted for about 100 years before cell phones came. The cell phones came because human beings wanted to move around and they wanted to communicate. And now the cell phone is essentially in everybody's pocket. And so you need to focus on the human need. You have to also think about feasibility, because is it possible to solve the problem, and how do you solve the problem? That's the feasibility part. And once you do that, you have to think about whether you can make money doing that stuff. Because there are a lot of innovations that didn't make it to the market because people didn't see value, or they could not make money out doing it. And the last but not the least, it should be frictionless. What that means is, if you have an innovation that comes to market and the use is very, very difficult, it takes you a long time to use that innovation, then again, it's not something that creates high impact. We'll talk about these as we go through this presentation. So I've chosen a couple of examples because it's more of a personal story. Peter talked about stories and exchanging and conversations. So I picked an example from my personal life when I started my career. This is a company called C. in India. And the reason I chose India is because I see Kosovo being almost 20 to 25 years phase shifted from where India was in terms of the maturity of the software life cycle and how innovation happens. So there was a no-name company called C. And the vision, as we talked about the perfect storm, these 4 things that we talked about, we need to have a bold vision. The vision was to transform the country's infrastructure. And the market was India and third world countries. And today, I think about 40% of the lines in India are served by products that were manufactured by this company. And that's a story you can tell in future. If you go to the enablers, the government supported it. There was technology to build the product, and there was talent. The one important lesson I learned is we were all fresh out of college, and we were asked to build a class 5 switch. How many of you know what a class 5 switch is? Only few, right? Because nobody talks about a class 5 switch. It's a really, really complicated product and set of things that you need to build. We were asked to build that in 3 years, and we had no clue whether it was possible or not. So we started the journey, and we decided we're going to build this switch. Why? Because we were fresh out of college. 100% ego, 0% skills. And we were trying to see what can we do. The important lesson I learned in addition to a vision is when you don't know what can be done, you can almost achieve the impossible. Okay? So those entrepreneurs in the audience, if you're listening to this, don't think anything is not possible. And in fact, when you think it's not possible, that's probably the place where you want to focus and see if it's possible to innovate. But essentially the impact was the entire country got connected. Before we started, we had to wait for a telephone for 6 months to get a telephone. After we were done, you could call in the morning and get it in the afternoon. Right? That's the kind of impact you have. The second one is the current journey we are in, and we are happy to say we are now in Kosovo as part of this company, is we have our company Wasabi does storing of data. So we have a really, really bold vision of storing the world's data in the cloud. And again, it's a global market. It's a really huge market. And what is happening is a disruption that's happening. People are going from on-prem into the cloud, and we are capturing the disruption. And enablers, we can look at it, it's technology and cloud and the need for more and more storage by businesses and people. The impact is it's affordable, it's hot cloud storage, and it caters to the businesses. The third example I picked was Google. Everybody knows Google, so I don't need to introduce Google to you folks. They have a bold vision to say provide access to the entire world at a single click, right? The need for information is very, very fundamental to human beings. We are curious and naturally we want to get access to information. And the market shift that was happening is a shift from traditional ads to digital ads. And I think that basically created this wave that Google successfully got in. It was not the search engine that got them to prominence. It was the fact that they could use that information and convert it in the form of advertisements. To monetize that was the one that launched that company. If you look at the moving to startups, right, which is where a lot of the innovation happens, I want to distinguish between startups as a company and startups as the mindset of people who worked on innovation. The three examples I provided in the previous slide, one was government, the other one started in Stanford, which was university environment, funded by VCs, and our company is funded by a different set of investors, but nevertheless, and with seasoned entrepreneurs. So innovation can happen anywhere. It's the mindset of the people. So I would say whether you work in a big company or a small company, it almost doesn't matter. It's how you think and how you bring products to market that's important. If you look at a startup, it has 5 stages. And I've called that out. You go from concept validation to solution validation to increasing customer footprint, to getting to profitability, and then eventually to maturity where the business is sustaining. If you look at it, there are 3 broad things that almost every company needs to look at. How do you take your product in a startup environment? How do you establish the feasibility, which is, can you do the solution? Then you talk about the viability, how do you make money? And focus on customer experience. And these are the things that you want to make sure that on the product side you get right. When you move to the process, you want to create process in a way that is simple, you keep refining it, but you also want to make sure that it's replicatable. And this is the piece that a lot of people forget in the innovation cycle. If it's not replicable, if you can't get it to a large number of people, it's very hard to scale a company. And I think that's an important lesson that I've learned over the years, and I think it's important to focus on that part when you're defining processes. And last but not the least, it's people, people, people. You want to make sure that you hire the best, and Kosovo has a great opportunity here. It's a young demographic, a lot of people who are focused on education, and you folks have the future, bright future ahead of you. So hire the best, make sure that you scale the teams as you're scaling the companies, and make sure that you develop people and invest in people. It looks like, especially from His Excellency the Prime Minister, as well as the Deputy Mayor and the Innovation, the Center of Kosovo, you folks are already on that path, and I think that's commendable how you're looking at the overall piece. Okay, so I'm going to talk about 2 examples here in terms of this. When the biggest challenge that startups face is when they get to maturity and they've scaled it, they become too satisfied with what happens. And that's almost always where the disruption happens. How many of you have heard of the Sony Walkman? Not bad. It's more than I thought it would. But it used to be a really popular product. Everybody was carrying it around. They would listen to music. It changed the way people listen to music. And they were doing very well until this thing happened, iTunes. How many of you heard about the iTunes announcement when Steve Jobs did that? Right? Some of you in the audience. But it's very interesting because what iTunes did was it combined product innovation and merged it with business model innovation, which is how you could buy songs and how you have technology to be able to do that. This literally made Sony lose its leadership in the market. They owned the content, they had music, they had leadership, but all iTunes did was change the whole thing, and it made life completely different, both for the artists as well as for the people who are listening to music. And iTunes, I think, is billions of dollars and so many millions of songs that they had. They extended it to movies and everything else. But then came Spotify, because the human beings wanted to listen to music a different way. And now iTunes is not exactly where it was a few years ago, but Spotify, because human beings want to listen to music when they want it, where they want it, without necessarily having to purchase or own it. This is a fantastic story as well, Blockbuster. I don't know how many of you know about Blockbuster, but they used to, you could go to a shop, you could rent these videos, and then you come home, or DVDs. Netflix came along and Blockbuster had a fantastic IPO. They were incredibly successful. And then before they knew it, they were out of business. And why do you think that happened? Because Netflix understood how human beings wanted to live. I don't know how cold and how much snow happens in Kosovo, because I'll figure that out in the next time I'm coming here. But in Boston, which is where I live, it is incredibly cold, and 4 to 5 months we have snow. Nobody wants to wear a jacket, get in their car, heat up the car, go to a store, pick up a video, and come back. They want it at home when they're listening to TV, on their couch on a wintry day. That's what Netflix did. And now again, the reason I'm bringing up these examples is it's very easy when you're in a startup and you grow to become very complacent and let yourself lose the leadership role. So the fifth stage, even though that's why I marked it in green, is as important. A lot of people focus on how do I take this company, how do I innovate, how do I get it to market, and how do I grow it. But a lot of people don't realize that getting to number one is good, but being number one is actually as difficult a task as anything else. I'm going to just talk briefly about this one. There are 4 aspects to any company and in any environment if you want to innovate. You need talent, which is people. You need a structure to make sure that the innovation makes it to market. You want to make sure that you have metrics so you can measure how well you're doing with innovation, and that's important for sustaining innovation. And last but not the least, you want to make sure that people are rewarded for what they do. The bottom 2 are important in bigger companies, but the top 2 are probably more important when you're in the early stages of innovation. Here, we are talking about what are the different types of innovation. Again, why is this important? A lot of people think you have to do something very fundamental to be an innovator. You don't. You can just take very, very simple things and you can add incremental value as long as it's useful and you're solving a problem that's important. So if you look at the 4 types, you take the 2 dimensions. One is technology. So you have either new technology or existing technology. Or you could have a new market that you create, or it can be an existing market. I've given some examples. Rather than walk through every one of them, I want to call out in each of these categories, how many of you know some of the brands that are put on that side? I'm sure Coke is a brand, but if you look at what Coke does to innovate, they don't have much room to innovate. They just have a drink that they have. What they try to do is innovate on the flavors. That's one of the things. How many of you have a washing machine at home? Probably everybody, right? Most of you do. Why? Because this used to be a very manual process. Somebody said, hey, this must be a better way to do it. But in order to invent the washing machine, they had to have electricity. They had to have the electronics associated with it. Somebody has to put all this together. But if you look at it, that radically changed the way how things happened at home. And One of the things that you look at, and look at Peloton, what happened to Peloton? The stationary bikes existed. They just came up with an experience. They got things together. So the point I'm making here is innovation comes in so many different ways. It can come in the form of business model. It can come in the form of products. It can come in the form of marketing. It can come in the form of just putting everything together and getting a solution to the market. If you go to, I'm going to skip through this. The process part of it is the key thing I want to call out here, right? Ford, when they manufactured cars, until then, all of the cars used to be done custom, right? I mean, people would actually build the whole car by themselves. But what Ford did is they created this assembly line, which is purely process-based. And that basically helped scale these cars and the automobile to what it is today. Dell, on the other hand, is an 18-year-old. He got out of college, and he was doing disk replacement in industries. He found that there's a different way by which computers can be manufactured, and he created a supply chain automation and innovation in that basically got all of the computers to our homes much faster than what was existing. And then Airbnb is another story where people just took their homes and they started renting, and everybody said that's a bad idea, this will never work, and things like that. And the founders of the company stayed with it. And before we know it, we now have a company that's probably a $70 billion market cap company that has no property that it owns and is able to provide rentals all over the world. $70 billion. So that's the kind of impact in companies that happens when innovators get going. The light bulb in history has always been one of the best inventions because it converted night to day. And it had so much economic and social impact. You had the basic bulb that needed to be manufactured. But what happened when Edison came up with, I think they call it the Park Street power station. The first power station that fueled light bulbs was probably smaller than this auditorium and could light up 400 bulbs. Whereas today, the largest power station is capable of generating billions of megawatts a year. But it took a lot of iteration, and that's the other thing I want to say. Innovation has iteration that goes through it. So you start with something small, and then you iterate through it, and then you get to the finish line, and what you see is a story that has no connection with where things started. And that is the power of innovation. And what does it do to human beings, right? It gives you more wake time. You can work during the night. It introduces the concept of 24-hour shifts, which didn't exist. It gave businesses better opportunity. It gave people at home more leisure time and better standard of living. And not only that, once that happened, over 100+ years, there are so many things that have been happening just because that plumbing was put in place. Okay. Moving on to stakeholders, right? Every startup and innovation has 5 stakeholders. You have the shareholders who put money into the company. You have the employees of the company. You have the partners. And you have the customers. And finally, you have society. The benefits are called out. The shareholders want return on investment. The employees want learning, growth, and market visibility. Consumers or customers want solutions and value for what this innovation provides. Partners want to make sure that they're part of the ecosystem. We talked about ecosystem earlier, and that's important. And last but not the least, for the society, it's about economic development and quality of life. So if you look at Kosovo, you folks are at a very, very interesting inflection point where all of this can take the country in terms of economic development and also quality of life. And I think software and the internet and the connectivity around the world makes it easier for you to do it now than 50 years ago. So always there's a call to action. What is it that you want to talk to entrepreneurs? And everybody has a role to play for innovation to thrive in a country. So my call to entrepreneurs is going to be, take the journey of innovation, dream big. That's one thing that I would say. Don't dream small, dream big. Set a really bold vision because you may spend your entire life going after it, but it'll be worth it. Okay, don't set the goal too small that you have to redefine your goals every few years. It's good to have a broad vision. And then just execute for scale. Once you execute for scale, the scale makes it worth the journey. Okay? And a lot of entrepreneurs, and it's interesting because when I used to mentor startups, and I still do, they come and ask me, I've had conversations, what's your professional goal? What do you want to do? And they say, I want to make $1 million. That's hardly a professional goal, right? What you want to do is measure for success in terms of the positive impact that your work is going to have on others. So focus on value creation and how much impact whatever you do is going to create in the society and in the people that are around you. Okay, and in terms of my request to the government, I think a lot of this was already covered in the introduction today. You have to invest in infrastructure, because I think somebody said that, hey, we have power and water now, but I think connectivity, now there's 100% connectivity, but you think you need to make sure that you have reliable connectivity and infrastructure for other people to be able to innovate. You want to make sure you invest in research, education, and training. Again, it was covered, so already Kosovo is ahead of the game in that. But you want to make sure that it's mainstream and it's not just a one-off. You want to make sure that the facilities, you have to make sure that the facilities exist for creating ecosystems, because you can go farther when everybody is involved in it. The community, the entrepreneurs, the institutions, the research institutes and universities, they all need to participate for it to have maximum effect. And last but not the least, be business friendly. This is where I think when I look back at India versus Kosovo, there's a phenomenal opportunity to learn from that experience. Because when the Y2K problem happened, a lot of the software companies jumped on it to capitalize on that. Two things went wrong. One is the infrastructure was not ready to take that kind of a growth. The second thing that happened was it shifted the whole focus to services instead of focusing on product development. So my request to the folks in Kosovo would be focus on products while you're focusing on services as well, because sometimes if you don't do that, it takes a long time for you to come back to a product mindset. And I would say, if you look at the commonality between India and Kosovo, I see that there's a young population, there's a lot of focus on education, there is a lot of excitement around doing new things, and there is internal pride about doing something that's going to help not just the company, but also the industry and the country in a big way. So if you look at it, I see a lot of similarities. There's a lot of lessons to be learned, going through finding out what worked and what didn't with the India story. And it's also important that you do have a fantastic future ahead. So just make sure the infrastructure is right, the ecosystems are in place, and you're business friendly in terms of helping entrepreneurs. The other thing I would say is there are some challenges associated with this, because even when I had to come from Boston to Kosovo, the connectivity, it would have been really helpful if there was a direct flight that got me here in 8 hours instead of the time that it takes to get here. But I know those are all things that you could work on and get in future, but I think you folks are very strategically located. There is a really, really great opportunity with the talent that you have and the infrastructure, effort that is being put in place already. Finally, we've covered the following. I wanted to just recap. I know I'm probably over time here, but when there's a human need and there's creativity, it leads to innovation. Innovation creates value. You need a team, you need vision, you need a market, and you need the mechanisms to scale to create high impact as a result of innovation. You also want to make sure that it's not restricted to 3 people in a garage or at the university or in government. It can happen anywhere where you have people with a great mindset, with a startup DNA, and everyone has a role to play. I know there was a call to action that, please participate, be supportive, try to help each other, and come together as a community and a country. And I think great things will happen here. And always measure by positive impact and the value that you create to all the stakeholders that we talked about, which is your fellow innovators as well as the country. I want to thank you for this opportunity again. And if you have any questions, I'll take it. Otherwise, I'll hand it over to Peter.